hopefully at least some. Apologize for anyone who's maybe viewing this recording. I missed part of the meeting. But what we're doing right now is we just started with how to make a fork and copy down the local repository. You can, I don't want to restart that conversation entirely, but we're not very far into it. So if anyone is watching the video, recommend checking out from the homepage. You can see on guide, there's an editing with VS Code guide. And we're essentially following along with this guide, and you can follow along yourself. We did the first step, which is going to our homepage and clicking the option in the web browser to create a fork. And now we're getting to the second step where we're going to make our local copy. So now I've got my fork created. I've got the command string saved for how I'm going to copy this locally. I'm going to go into my Visual Studio Code browser. And I'm going to look here, and I have a local directory here for forks in my Git. I have a lot of mess that I need to clean up in my local directory, but let's go to CD forks and see what I have in my forks directory. I do. So if you notice the structure of the Git page itself is github.com/afuel/ or your username, and then the name of your forked repository. And so I'd like to make my local structure match that. And so the organization essentially, or the user account that I'm going to be copying from, is afuel. So I want to put everything in a local folder called that matches that for myself. That's just my own personal preference. And you can see here that I already have a local clone of my fork, but I want to delete it. So I'm just gonna, because I just refreshed it online. Let's see. So, oh, and then I'm gonna say, put in my password. Okay, so now I have nothing. And I'm just gonna type in that command or paste in that command string that we just copied from our fork on GitHub. And again, you can follow standard instructions online if you don't have the GitHub CLI client, or you can also do like the git clone command. There are some nuances to using whether you use HTTPS or SSH, and if you have a local SSH key and different things that you can get into. That's one of the reasons why I like setting up the GitHub repo clone is you can set up your kind of config file once, and it generally works very well across all the operations you do in the client. Once you have that GitHub client config set up well. Okay, so now we're gonna download our fork, right? And one of the things that we'll see about a fork is looking at your Git config file. So every time you download a Git repository, you have a invisible directory. We call this, where is it? Oh, I need to go into the directory. And then I'm going to say, oh, well. So we have a directory called .git, and this has our .git/config is our config file. So if I go code .git/config, then it's going to open up our Git config. And this is if you just were to look at the Git config of a cloned repo, like I have a Git config of a cloned repo. This is not going to show in my thing here, but it will have this origin section, right? So if you clone a standard repository that's not a fork, it will have an origin. And when you clone a repository that is a fork, it also has this thing called Upstream. And so, this is telling my local Git client that my origin, the one that this is linked to, is from afuel ModernApps Ninja. But this Upstream reference here lets the Git client know that that this is a fork of the main repository at ModernApps Ninja /ModernApps Ninja GitHub.io. And so that way I can And you want to use that upstream. There's a lot of cool things you can do with upstream to make sure, because what I want to do is if I start editing my local files, I'm going to make sure that I have the latest, greatest version. As the one big thing with GitHub is like you're always trying to prevent it from having a conflict that it doesn't know about. And so generally that's with good practices, that's not too hard to do because like even on a busy repository, you have to ask the real challenge for Git when Git has confusion about two people changed something, which version is the version that I keep? Because Git's a version control system, right? And so what's the likelihood that two people are going to be editing the same file at the same time? And if you think about that, if I make small changes and if I'm only editing a particular file, there are certainly circumstances where it's desirable for multiple people to be doing joint editing. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying, like, if you think I'm going to pick a task, that task means that like I'm like right now, I want to create an event. Is there going to be somebody else? No, somebody else can come and add a different event file and get his no. Well, no, that doesn't conflict with what I'm doing. It's a different file. It goes into the folder. No big deal. The thing I have to worry about with Git being confused about version control, having a merge conflict, is if two people are editing the same exact file at the same time is the big thing you have to try to avoid. So I want to avoid those by making sure that I only make one edit to one file at a time. I want to make sure before I make that edit, I have pulled down the latest copy. And the third element of that is designing your repository itself in a way that that is conducive to that. So great example, we used to have people sign a guest book all the time whenever they went through a particular lab guide or course, and they had one file that was the guest book, and people would have to go in, and so I would have a class. And at the end of the class, everybody's going to sign their guest book at the same time. And so, just put your name on the line. Well, my name goes on line 13 and another name goes on line 14. And if you have several different people opening a point in time copy of that and then trying to add, Git's going to get confused real quick about whose name goes on what line. And so that's one of the reasons why you find now that, and I think why some of the rationale behind unstructured data, like NoSQL and such, is see, like when we say go and register for enroll in a course, you now post a file with your name rather than signing a common guest book, and that works very well from everything I need. I have a list of that information, right? But you think about your local file structure, I can put files into a directory all day long. It's modifications inside of a file that are harder for our style of directory structures to match. And so there's also that element of designing your repository in a way to prevent merge conflicts. And when you do all those three things, merge conflicts can be extremely rare. And so the good thing is then you don't have to worry for the most part, at least when you're participating in the call, about like hopefully myself and the community as a whole is working to make sure that our design is good, to make sure that we're not creating a design that is conducive to having more merge conflicts. So you shouldn't have to think about that. But all you should think about is there's a couple things that I do that are like riding a bicycle. Every time I'm going to go maintain a file, I'm going to sync my repository to make sure I have the locust file, the latest copies of the file. I'm going to make a relatively small change, and then I'm going to update and synchronize my repository real quick. And that's like riding a bicycle. You do that very, very consistently. Your Git life becomes smooth, and merge conflicts are really easy to resolve. They're confusing at first, right? They're not a difficult thing, but the problem is when you have an agile automated operation, every time that there's a merge conflict and Git isn't sure what to do, that just slows everything down. Now I have to find a particular human. Sometimes it could be any admin, sometimes it's a very specific person, and they've got to go, or sometimes you have to go and say, well, two people are trying to edit. I've got to go reach out to both of those people to figure out what their intent was, so I know what the final version of this document is supposed to actually look like. And so yeah, there's a lot of information, right? But so what we're going to do now is you saw that we've created the fork. I already synchronized my fork in the web browser, so my fork should have a pretty up-to-date copy. But I don't know if there's been changes since. Right? I mean, there's people making changes to the Modern Apps homepage repository all the time. And so, right, last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to do every time I sit down, especially at a different time when I haven't just already refreshed it. I want to refresh this before I get started. So now that I can see that I have my upstream already defined in this fork, I can do something called a git fetch upstream. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull down any changes in my upstream upstream repository, which is the main GitHub, our main homepage. Any changes there, it's going to pull it down to my local working environment. It's not going to apply it yet. It's just going to kind of have it in a holding area. So that way I can decide how I want to apply it. And there's are multiple different ways about how you can apply it. I can do I could say git merge, and I could say upstream, and then specify the name of the branch. Now merging, right, is going, and if I merge it, I'm merging the branch from upstream into my copy that's locally. So right now, it's important to always think before you do these things, you want to think about, what branch am I in? I'm on my main, and your main branch, even when you're making copies, your main branch is where you generally want to merge in updates, because if you start merging updates in a feature branch where you're working on just one particular file that you're updating, you can potentially pull down things that you didn't intend to. So I like to do this to where I make sure my main branch is synchronized. Once my main branch is synchronized, then I will make a feature branch to work on my update, and then use that to push. So I'm on my main branch. I already fetched my upstream. So now I could do merge it in, but I like to do rebase to keep our Git history clean. And another reason I like to do rebase, I'm not going to get into the details of what a rebase versus a merge is exactly. I think for me, I see benefits of using merge and rebase, and there's a whole religious debate about it. But the one thing for me that kind of has pushed me to the rebase methodology of merging in updates is that's what Kubernetes community uses, and the Kubernetes contributor guide is very religious about using Rebase. They're very passionate about it. So I've started using Rebase, and so what Rebase does is if you have made any local changes that you haven't pushed to the upstream source yet, which could always be true because upstream could be changing at any point in time, then what it does is it pulls down, it applies the latest updates first, okay, and then it takes any local changes that you have had and it applies them. In this case, we haven't made any local edits yet, so that's kind of neither here nor there, but it helps keep your history clean when you push it back up. So I want to say git rebase, and by default, it's going to, I can specify I want to rebase to upstream both the repository or the branch. But by default, it's going to look at the main branch on the upstream repository. And so we're up to date. And now I can say, check out a branch to just check out -b, and we're going to call the branch. So when I make local editing branches the intent here is I'm going to use this just to create one event file and then push the one event file up. This branch will only be temporary. Now, one thing about branches is branches are locally significant to the repository you're working on. So in this case, what's the repository I'm working on? I'm working on the A-Fuel ModernApps Ninja GitHub repository. Remember, a fork is still a repository. So when you create a branch name, the branch name is only significant to your fork, right? So you don't have to think, oh, this branch is if you're going to use this branch to submit your updates to the main homepage, right? But when you do that, what the administrator of the main homepage is doing is they're taking the updates from your branch and they're merging them into a branch that is on the main homepage. The name of your branch or your exact branch itself never actually moves, right? It's just the contents that that branch represents. And so when you think about naming your branch, your temporary branch, the main thing you have to think about is you're going to get busy. You're going to be doing lots of things. And you need to set up your working habits in a way to where you habitually do things in a way that avoids conflict, right? I do some things in how I name this branch that may not be relevant a lot of the time, but I just make it part of my habit because some of the time, like for example, I'm working on the A-Fuel fork of this. So I could just call it temp branch 01, right? But when I name branches, I always include something like my username, because there are times where you may be working on the same fork as somebody else. You may be going in to help somebody else. There are other use cases for forks where teams are working on projects. So I just make a simple habit every time I make a temporary branch, even though the purpose is to delete it. I use this common sense naming to avoid problems. Because the other problems that you can run into with branches is, let's say I call this, a fuel 01 or tempo 1. I want to now, and then I push the update up, I submit my pull request. What if I forget to delete it? Right. Then later I come in, I make a totally different change. I say, I want to check out branch tempo 1. Well, I might already have previous changes associated with that branch saved locally if I forgot to delete it and clear it out. And that happens. It's inevitably going to happen to most people at some point if you end up working, getting really busy. And so I do, git checkout -b. And one of the things I do is I put in, usually I do, when I do this manually, I say use a semi-random number. If I do this in a script, I will use an actual random number generator to make sure that, because I have many times in the past, reused the same branch name, thinking I was just making new changes and having old stuff that was associated with it. Because, like I said, these hygiene habits, sometimes you don't delete the old thing. Sometimes you can't delete the old things. That's where it gets hard, right? Because you may submit a pull request, and when you submit that pull request, the administrator may say, oh, hey, I want you to change something before, and then resubmit. And sometimes I'll tell you to do that. Will be like, I'm going to close this one out totally, and you need to resubmit a new change request. Sometimes it can be, I like what you did here in this thing, but you forgot to include, something. And then you can go into a branch that you've already submitted and make an edit to it, right? And so sometimes you can't just delete it right away, which is one of the reasons for this habit. So I like to use the time of day as my semi-random number. So because it provides for me enough likelihood that, assuming that I delete things on a relatively as I should, once I'm done with this branch, then I shouldn't accidentally run into using the same branch name again. But I'll just for now call it A-Fuel 855, and now I'm on a branch. And now I want to go and I want to, let's go ahead and close this Explorer. I'm going to go ahead, we'll close that, and let's go into CD content, English, I don't want to say events, and then we'll say LS. I'm going to copy one of these. Actually, I don't need to copy one of the existing files. I'll just go code. Let's just call this hackathon.md. And I'm going to go ahead and oh, wait, what am I doing? And I also want to open up, let's just open up one of these 5/14/21, just so I can copy the metadata out of it. So I'm going to copy the front matter from this. I need to clean up that front matter a little bit. So copy the front matter, paste in the front matter here. I know we are just about out of time, but I'm going to see if I can just do something real quick we'll just change this to past dates. So that way it should not show up. But I do want to show how to push this. So I'll go ahead and save this. And I'll just change this in case this does show up, but it shouldn't. I'll just call this test. Save that. Okay, so now I saved the file. Now I'm going to say, now what I have to do is Git is aware that a file has been saved, but it's not going to, if I were to try to like make, push something, I have to add it to staging area first. So in this case, I'm going to put git add dot. And so you can name the specific thing. I usually do dot, I'm in the event directory. So one of the things that I do sometimes, like, or you may be used to if you're working on your own totally isolated project, is going to the root directory and doing something like git add dot. I do that a lot. That will check everything in your entire local directory to scan it to see if there's any changes and submit everything. And if you're doing a big, building out a new repository, that might be useful, but it's also, it can be very risky, because what if once you've had this, if you make changes regularly to your local file system, if you start working in a repository regularly, there may be times where you forget to submit something, right? And you have a local change. And so you always, when you do git add, it's good to make sure that you're specific enough to only add the things that you think you're adding. And so it's probably best not to use git add dot at all. It might be okay in this case since I'm in the event directory, because it's only going to add new things that are at the event subdirectory and lower. I can go ahead and I can actually specify the specific file name, and that's a safer way of doing it. That way I know the only thing I've added to this branch is the hackathon, and now I can do git commit -m, adding folder. Now I've committed it. Now when I do git push, it's going to push it to actually, and it wants me to, I didn't set my upstream yet. So, or you can manually define, I'm just going to copy and paste this. Okay, now we have pushed this to my fork. Right, so I can't push, I'm going to create a pull request to push to somebody else. I'm not the well, I am the admin, but generally you're not going to be the admin of the ultimate destination, or you wouldn't be opening, you wouldn't need to go through this process. And so you can see back when I go, I can see now that my fork already knows. I didn't have to refresh the page. It already knows. Do compare and pull request, and make sure that you have a nice comment here, so that way I know what's going on. Real quick, you can check. You can see here this directional arrow is awesome when you're looking at this, because it's going to show to help you really understand. If you forget, you're going to take information that comes from your fork, from your new branch, and you're sending it to this base stream repository, to the main branch, right? That's what I want the pull request to be. Click create pull request. And now I have the pull request there. And for you, for anyone else who submits, that's you'll see. For me, I can go and I can actually, I'm the administrator, so I can see how I can go ahead and merge this. And so I usually review these, and then I'll click merge pull request, and then it'll be live. And that's the process. And we're right at the top of the hour, so I apologize that that took the last second. Hopefully that was useful. And I will hang around, and if anyone has any questions, and yeah, so that if you need to drop, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Art.
Thanks, Rick.
I think that was, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.